So, AJ on board. We are going to talk a little bit about AFCEA. AFCEA Atlanta is part of the AFCEA International organization, and we're not-for-profit, and we work to build a bridge between federal, industry, academia, and local resources. We serve the greater Atlanta area, one of 3 chapters in Georgia. There's one in Fort Gordon, one in Middle Georgia at Robbins, and we've got a little over 300 members. 65 of those we have 65 corporate members, and about 25% of our members are considered life members. AFCEA International, our parent organization, currently has a little over 30,000, I was going to say 300,000, but 30,000 members and 138 chapters. With 1,552 corporate members. Our chapter focus is working on connecting the various communities that we serve around the Atlanta area. And then we work on providing a number of topics that are timely and that help promote thought leadership and connecting a lot of dots along the way as we implement new technologies, new strategies. We work to provide support to communities, not just of the professional, but we do provide support to teachers and students through scholarships, science fairs, and teacher tool grants. And then we also support our troops through events like the USO Block Leave program. Industry has a platform through us to help disseminate some information. We also work to provide job fairs and small business industry days and other events that might be appropriate. So, I think with that, AJ, you can take over presentation.
All right, so let me just let me figure out how to switch it over to share screen.
There you go. I see your slide.
All right, so it is coming up. All right, yep. Awesome. And get it in the right view. All right, so just wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Basically, what we're going to do is go beyond Security Plus. So what we're going to discuss here in the webinar is just an introduction to CompTIA CySA Plus, the new exam. So it's C0-002. Before we get started, what I wanted to do is just give you just a brief introduction of myself. My name is AJ Holt. Some of the credentials that I hold, I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I've actually been an MCT since 1997. I'm actually a certified EC Council instructor, which does nothing but security certifications. And then some certs that I actually hold are the CompTIA CAS Plus, the CompTIA CySA Plus, their Security Plus, Certified Ethical Hacker. I have several different versions of the Microsoft Systems Engineer dating back also to 1997. So started off with NT40 and have kept that current all the way up through 2016. Also Microsoft Certified Systems Administrator, and just some other credentials that I've had. With Cisco, I've been a CCNA, CCNP, so pretty well-rounded in the technology industry. Also in this intro, I just have just a brief thing of what I've done. So I've done a lot of DoD 8140 training for literally every facet of the U.S. government. So, all branches of the military, all your different 3-letter agencies. So across, all of those different sectors. Also a lot of experience in the insurance industry, financial industry, automotive, manufacturing, so not only have I been a trainer over the past 23 years, but I've also been a consultant over the last 23 years. So I've been able to take a lot of my experiences that I've learned from consulting and actually, bring that into the classroom environment. Now, from there, what I want to do is just kind of introduce the CySA Plus. So in this slide here, basically what we're looking at is just the exam details. So number of questions, I have it stated as minimum of 85 questions. And the reason why it's a minimum of 85 questions is the exam is constantly evolving. So if we run a class this month, it may be 85 questions. Next month, that exam may be 92 questions. So as they're actually making modifications to the exam, that number will fluctuate. One thing that CompTIA has been doing with their newer certifications is they're constantly updating the exam pool. So, it's very dynamic. There's a lot of changes with new questions being added in, old questions being taken out. So, very dynamic in nature. The actual type of questions that someone would actually see on the exam would be, you have multiple choice. So, with that type of question, you'd have your scenario, and the type of multiple choice questions that they could have would be, like a choose one. So you have your scenario, and there's one correct answer. You have another type of multiple choice where you have your scenario, and they might have choose two or choose three, where there's 2 or 3 correct answers. They also have a version of a multiple choice where they say, choose all that apply. So in a scenario like that, there could be 1 correct answer, 2 correct answers, maybe 3 correct answers. Also, in the newer CompTIA exams, and especially on this one, they state that it has performance-based questions. Now, with that being said, a performance-based question could actually be a simulation, where you're within the exam, you're within a virtual machine, and you're within the interface, and you have to actually make configuration changes. So it's actually, it's a simulation. But also within that category of performance-based, you'll also have scenarios where they're drag and drop. So you'll have your potential options to the left, and then to complete the solution, you'll drag those options to the right. So that's another type of performance-based question. You're putting steps in order. And then a third type of performance-based question, they may have scenarios where they present an interface, and within that interface, you may have drop downs. So you'll hit the drop down, and then you'll select your option. So when you hear the term performance-based, most people associate that with some type of simulation. But there's actually, 3 different flavors of that performance-based type of question. The actual time to complete the exam, they give a maximum of 165 minutes, which, me having experience taking the 2 different versions of the exam, I definitely feel that it's more than enough time. So one thing I kind of recommend to my students when they take the exam, they're going to be aware that they are going to see performance-based questions, and they're going to see regular multiple choice. What I kind of recommend there is that you focus on knocking out the multiple choice questions first. This way you kind of see where you're at timing-wise. So go through all of your multiple choice questions first, mark your performance-based questions, and then come back to those once you've gone through all the multiple choice. So like, for example, when I took my exam, I think it may have taken me maybe 45 minutes to an hour tops to complete the multiple choice questions. So then at that point, I know that I have X amount of minutes to then work on the performance-based questions. I find that, just in my experience, the performance-based questions can definitely be a lot more challenging. So you want to make sure that you have adequate time that you can focus on those types of questions. The passing score for this particular exam is 750 out of 900. So just in my personal experience, I've probably taken a total of probably about 120 technical exams. A lot of those exams are actually based on a score out of 1,000. But your CompTIA exams, if it does actually have a passing score, like in this example, would be 750 out of 900. So I believe that equates to like probably about 83% within that realm. Versus if you were taking like a CAS plus, that doesn't actually have a passing score. It's just a pass-fail exam. Yeah, so this exam will be 750 out of 900. The actual retail cost for the exam is actually $359. There are some resources out there where you can get discounted prices on that exam cost. Now, from there, what I wanted to look at just at a very high level is the exam objectives. So the way CompTIA breaks this particular exam, they break it into domains. So there's 5 security domains. So the first domain is actually threat and vulnerability management. So they say roughly that is about 22% of the exam. From there, your second domain is going to be software and system security. That one is, they're saying, at 18%. We also have domain 3, which is security operations and monitoring. That one is at 25% of the exam. Domain 4 is incident response. They're saying about 22%. And then the final domain is compliance and assessment, which they're saying at 13%. Now, this is all public knowledge. And I think this is really just a baseline because in my experience, when I've gone in and taken exams that do have a percentage breakdown like this, it doesn't always work out that way. So like, for example, when I took my exam, I had a lot more questions in compliance and assessment. So they're saying here that that's the lowest domain, it's 13%. But yet, when I did take my exam, I'd well above 13%. So this is just kind of a baseline on how they're breaking it down. Now, what I wanted to do from there is I took each of the domains. So once again, we have 5 security domains that will be covered on this particular exam. And what I did is I took each of those domains and broke it down into categories that you'll actually see within that domain. So with threat and vulnerability management, they're going to look at explaining the importance of threat data and intelligence. Also, utilizing your threat intelligence to support your organization's security needs. Now, in those first 2 points, I think there's a couple things that I would like to expand on. When you're thinking of threat intelligence, so if I'm working within an organization and I'm working with threat intelligence, that's a cycle that should be an ongoing process. So in today's day and age, with all the possible risk that we have to technology, as we're doing that threat intelligence, this has to be an ongoing cycle within the organization for it to be successful. I think another point to make is, when you're looking at threat intelligence, particularly for this exam, there's a few frameworks that they're going to look at. So one of them is called the diamond model. So if you plan on taking this exam, down the road, that diamond model is something that you're going to want to be familiar with. They're going to look at the MITRE, AT&T, and CK model. So that'll be another thing to do a little research on. They'll also cover, Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain. So those 3 points kind of fit into those first 2 bullet points within this slide. Also, within the threat and vulnerability management domain, we have to be familiar with performing vulnerability management activities. We also have to analyze the output from common vulnerability assessment tools. Now, just to kind of expand on that and give a recommendation. So if you plan on taking the exam, you're going to want to be familiar with Nessus. So there's a lot of scenarios dealing with Nessus, which is a vulnerability assessment tool. They will also go into a lot of detail with Nmap, which is a command line tool that we can run on Kali Linux, for looking for, OS versions, open ports, stuff of that nature. So even though it's a vendor neutral certification, those are 2 tools that I had a lot of questions, a lot of scenarios on both the version 1 and version 2 exam. So want to be familiar with Nessus and also want to be very familiar with Nmap. Not only what they do, but within Nmap, knowing all of the different switches that are available. Now, from there, we also have to explain the threats and vulnerabilities that are associated with specialized technology. So as we get into different industries, for example, the power plant industry. So knowing within these environments, threats and vulnerabilities, to these specialized environments. We also, we go into detail on threats and vulnerabilities associated with operating in the cloud. So you're seeing more and more organizations move to cloud technologies. And one thing that I've noticed, because I teach, a lot of different security courses, operating in the cloud definitely being pushed. And one thing that I've noticed that not a lot of courses cover, which I think should be in these courses, is, controlling physical access, which that's always addressed. But then when you have these cloud environments, these are data centers which are using virtualized products. So for example, you hear the term virtual machine. Well, with a virtual machine, we have the ability to actually implement what is called a shielded VM. We have the ability to encrypt that VM. And by shielding that VM and understanding the process of how to do that, that actually adds another layer of security within this virtualized environment, which is within our cloud infrastructure. So I think that a lot of vendors fail to really address that topic. They address the risks that are associated with it, but they don't address the countermeasure. How do I address that? So when thinking about physical access and thinking about securing VMs, that's where that shielded VM concept comes into play. And, there's a lot of good information. If you do a Google search for shielded VMs, you'll get a lot of good educational information on that process, step by step on how to do it, what risks and vulnerabilities that will actually help address. And then we also have to, within this domain, implement controls to mitigate attacks and software vulnerabilities. So one of the things that comes to mind immediately with this would actually be patch management. We have patch management systems for, our applications, for our operating systems, different hardware devices. But I mean, the key to mitigating that risk, of those vulnerabilities is going to be patch management. Now, moving into the next slide, this domain here, software and system security. So the three main areas that they're hitting here, first would be applying security solutions for infrastructure management. Now, that is a very broad topic. So the mindset kind of going into security solutions for the infrastructure, first thing that you're thinking is defense in depth. So I want to have multiple layers of security. So how am I going to address that? How do I address defense in depth? So I'll keep this very high level because we have a short amount of time to get through these topics. But first thing I'm thinking is network segmentation. So I'm using routers, I'm using VLANs to actually segment my network. And then I can actually set up ACLs so that I can specify what type of traffic is allowed to get from one segment to another. In today's day and age, we're doing a lot of remote work, working from home. So that's where VPNs can come into play, to give us, a secure mechanism to connect from home into our work environment. The idea behind a VPN would be, we're creating an encapsulated, encrypted, and authenticated secure tunnel through an unsecure network. That unsecure network is the internet. So we're tunneling through the internet via our VPN so that we can gain access to our corporate resources. So that's going to fall within this defense in depth. We're also going to have intrusion prevention systems. So that's another topic that will be covered in this course. We have firewalls, to control what type of traffic we want to allow in, what type of traffic we want to allow outbound. We can also set up, network access control, so I can set up health requirements on, what I consider a healthy machine. So for example, for you to connect to my network, you must have antivirus. Antivirus must be up to date. You must have a host-based firewall, must be enabled, things of that nature. So I can have that, within my health policy. So that'll fall within network access control. Also in defense in depth, we have content filtering, so controlling what type of content our people can view, as they work from inside our network and access internet-based resources. A big part of defense in depth is going to be identity services, so how we're proving our identity to the system. So when you guys are at work and you're sitting at a Windows-based machine and you're authenticating to your Active Directory environment, you're using a protocol called Kerberos. So that's authentication for your internal infrastructure. When we start integrating single sign-on, between different organizations, that's when federation services come into play. Yep. So all of that those technologies, those terms, that all fits under, infrastructure management. Also within this domain here, they're also going to cover, software assurance best practices. So this is where they'll get into like SDLC, that's software development lifecycle. So we have different models for SDLC. So I'll just kind of point out some of the common models: waterfall, spiral, agile. So those are different SDLC processes. So that'll be another objective that they'll hit within this domain and kind of understanding, at a high level, what those different models are. Also within software assurance best practices, me personally, I started as a developer, way back. I was actually a C++ programmer, did Visual Basic, and this is 20 plus years ago. And one thing that we had in mind as we're writing code is making sure that we're doing secure coding. So we have security in mind as we're actually developing our software. So that is another objective that will also be discussed. From there, they'll cover hardware assurance. That's where you'll get into like full hard drive encryption. So for example, on the Windows platform, they actually use BitLocker as their full hard drive encryption. We also have hardware security modules, which we can use, to actually apply to our hardware assurance best practices. Now, from there, the next domain, security operations and monitoring. So what they're actually going to get into here is analyzing data as part of a security monitoring activity. So what that comes down to is logging. So we have multiple levels that we can actually log at. So for example, if you guys are familiar with Windows 10, if you go to your Windows 10 workstation and go into Event Viewer, you're going to see several different logs. So that falls into this security monitoring. And that's just on, a Windows 10 machine. It has a application log, it has a system log, it has a dedicated security log. It then has logs for each individual service that's actually running on that system. And, once again, we're just talking about an operating system. A moment ago, we mentioned VPNs. There's also logs that get associated with our VPN solution. There's logs that are associated with our firewall solutions. So to be successful on this exam, you definitely have to understand the concept of logging. And then they even get into, breaking down the contents, within a log, so what the events mean, what types of attack you may be under by looking at these logs. They'll also, within this domain here, they'll look at implementing configuration changes, to existing controls to improve security. So what they're looking at here from a high level is, within an organization, we're going to have policies, written security policies. We're going to have documentation, which are procedures, which are more step-by-step implementation guides. We have playbook guides, for response. So they do cover that detail as well on this exam. And also at a high level, from a technology standpoint, I have expertise in Active Directory and group policy. So by using group policy as a tool, that gives me a very efficient way to improve my security posture, when I'm dealing with, Windows-based servers, Windows-based clients. I've worked in environments that have ranged anywhere from 200 users to as large as 750,000 users. And I need a way to effectively implement these controls, to improve my security posture. Another thing they'll actually hit, going through the importance of proactive threat hunting. So technology is evolving. So as technology evolves, we have to identify and understand the new threats that we may be up against as technology evolves. And then they'll also look at, comparing and contrasting, automation concepts and technologies. So to kind of cross-reference this, as we move more and more to cloud technologies, in order for that to be successful, there's going to be a lot of automation. So we have to make sure that those workflows within that automation process, we got to keep security in mind. One of the downfalls I think a lot of people have is they're looking at an efficient way to get something done, but are they doing it in a secure manner? So as you understand all of the different steps and phases within that process, that is where you can actually, address those risks and address those vulnerabilities in that process. From there, we also do have a domain on incident response. So they keep this at a pretty high level. So in the first point here, explain the importance of the incident response process. So that's actually going to be broken into 4 phases. We have preparation. We're preparing for an incident. The next phase is going to be detection and analysis. So detecting when an incident has occurred and analyzing that incident. From there, phase 3, we want to contain it. So we have the containment phase. From there, phase 4 within this response process is eradication and recovery. And during that phase, I think it's super important that, we have a roundtable discussion to kind of go back through, what was detected, here's our analysis, this is what we did to contain it, this is what we did to eradicate it. And during that roundtable, that tabletop exercise, we want to address it so that it doesn't happen in the future. So I think that's super, super important that that is done within that phase. They look at applying the appropriate incident response procedures. And really what this comes back to, something I stated in an earlier slide, you have written policies, we have procedures in place, we have playbook guides, which are step by step. So that's going to be part of that incident response procedure. Also analyzing potential indicators, of the compromise. And I think that really goes back to, the detection and analysis phase. And then also part of incident response, and they do keep this at a high level, getting into basic digital forensic techniques. So they'll point out a tool that they'd like to mention, NCASE. NCASE is a digital forensic tool. And what NCASE gives us the ability to do. So one example is I can create a forensic image. Once that forensic image is created, it's digitally signed with a hashing algorithm. And we use that hashing algorithm to actually create a digital signature of that image. And that's how we can verify the integrity of that image, verify if it's been modified. So that'll all be part of that digital forensic process. From there, another domain will actually be compliance and assessment. So some of the important concepts in this realm would be, understand the importance of data privacy and protection. So, just give you a technical example here. I think everyone attending this webinar has probably done online banking or managed their credit card online. So in both of those scenarios, it is actually done over HTTPS. So it's going to rely on a protocol called TLS, Transport Layer Security. That TLS protocol is actually providing confidentiality, which is helping ensure data privacy. So as that data is going over the wire, that data is encrypted. So by it being encrypted is going to provide that confidentiality piece. Also, the packets being sent as we're doing that online banking are also being digitally signed. That's going to provide an integrity check, to verify that something hasn't been modified within transit. Also, within that process, there is a certificate that gets used that also provides authentication. So it's proving the identity of the end device that we're connecting to. So if I'm going to do online banking, I want to make sure that I'm providing my user account and password information to a valid web server at my legitimate bank. I don't want to be providing that information to a malicious user. So that authentication piece also comes into play. And that's just one example. So, within the course, the full delivery of the course, we actually look at TLS encryption, we look at IPsec encryption, for internal network traffic, also for VPN traffic. We look at, file encryption, so down to the file level, and also look at, encryption in regards to full hard drive encryption. So all of that applies to, our data privacy and protection. Also, another thing within this realm is, applying security concepts in support of organizational risk mitigation. In today's day and age, we know the risks are out there, so we have to identify, depending on the sector that we're working in, what are our risks? How do we mitigate these risks? How do we do it in a cost-effective way? So that's all going to come into that risk mitigation planning. Also within this realm, we're looking at the importance of frameworks, policies, which these are written security policies, procedures, which are our step-by-step guides, and our controls. We have different types of controls. We have technical controls that, we use to control technology. We have administrative controls. We have physical controls. So they really go into a lot of detail in those areas in the course as well. Now, from there, I pointed out some resources that are available for preparation for this exam. And these are, just my personal recommendations, and they're commercial resources. So Cybex actually has a CySA Plus study guide for this particular exam. It's actually second edition. The first edition is for the version 1 of the exam. Excellent resource, so they break it down at the beginning of each chapter. They basically point out which exam objectives will be covered within that chapter and what security domain it's actually coming from. So that's one thing that I like about this particular book. They tell us what we're covering in the chapter and how it maps to the exam. So then they have the content within the chapter, and then they'll have a review section where they might cover anywhere from 20 to 25 review questions on that particular chapter. And then they also, with this particular book, they have at the end of each chapter, like key exam points. So it kind of maps back to the objectives that were covered. And these are some key areas within those objectives that you should know for the exam. Also, with the purchase of this book here, you also get, I believe, some flashcards that you can actually download, and then some additional practice tests as well. The second resource I pointed out here is the Cybex CompTIA CySA Plus practice test book. So this is basically a book that is nothing but practice test questions. So what I always kind of recommend to people that I provide the training for, the more questions that you work or that you look at based around the technology, sample questions, the better you get to evaluate how much you really understand it. So I think it's important to look at as many questions as possible. And that's why I recommended the second resource here. So CySA Plus practice test book. So it is literally, it's a book. You can get it in Kindle version. You can get it in hard copy, and it's nothing but practice questions, probably upwards of around 1,000 questions that are all around the objectives that have been covered in the study guide. Now, a third resource that I actually put here in this slide, this is a free resource that you can get to on the web. So if you go to CompTIAexamtest.com, so this is a website that actually has practice test material for like Security Plus, CAS Plus, CySA Plus. They have a free version, which is you can run it online. And then you can purchase their practice tests. I think it's like anywhere from $15 to $20 within that range. This particular site, I wanted to point it out just to have another resource to look at questions. And with this particular site here, I do want to add a little disclaimer. Their content and their questions are really good. So they're a good representation of the type of questions that you'll see, but there is a negative to this third resource. In my personal experience, what I've seen is in the answers that they provide, I've actually seen some errors in their information. So I like to just add that disclaimer. So CompTIAexamtest.com, that's a good resource, to kind of look at this. These are the types of questions that I'm going to see. But if you do end up using it for a resource, I think it's very important that you go through the scenarios and you validate their answers. So I always kind of make a joke with my students. I say, don't press the I believe button. So, if you read the scenario and based off what you've learned, what you've studied, if it seems incorrect, you want to research that. And I think that research also aids you in, learning the concept. So like as you're researching and as you're reading, on a concept, whether you're looking at the definition of it or the inner workings of that concept, I think that helps in the learning process. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, there's a lot of stuff that's out there on the internet, which may be free. It may be good resources, but I have seen, definitely seen a lot of errors in their stuff. So I do like to point that out. So with that being said, those are our objectives. So what I wanted to do is just kind of open it up to the group and see if you guys have any questions on what we've gone over, the talking points that we've gone through.
Thank you very much. So people, if you guys have questions, unmute yourself and or raise your hand and we can recognize you, and then we can get some questions going here. But AJ, I want to say the first one, I know that the people are doing things remotely now. Are you seeing any significant difference in the approach and any update to the content based on people working remote? I know we talked about like the VPNs and stuff like that. Have you seen that reflected in the test yet?
So definitely not in the exam. Yeah. So well, actually, there are some objectives that may look at remote technologies. So with that being said, like if we're doing something over, let's say Zoom or GoToMeeting, GoToTraining, most of the time those sessions are actually conducted over an encrypted session. So, at the end of the day, it's technology. So here we are, we're collaborating with one another, and this connection is actually done over an encrypted session. So that's a good question, Paul.
Anybody else have any questions out there or want a little clarification?
Yeah. Hey, hello, AJ. How you doing? This is Mark. I noticed on the last slide you stated that the study guide and the practice test is also available. Is that part of the actual 359 exam cost, or is that additional cost?
No, so this the references that I referenced here, that would be an additional cost. So like with CompTIA courses, depending on how you take the course. So let's say you were going to self-study this. Basically, you're going to buy your book so that you can study from, and then you're going to buy your exam voucher. So those are two different costs. This particular book that I referenced here, I want to say it's no more than $50. I want to say it's in like the 35 to 45 range. And those two books that I mentioned, probably one of the best places to buy them is via Amazon. So on Amazon, you can actually get, the physical version of it or the Kindle version. But that would be an additional cost, separate from the voucher. So good question.
Yeah, this is Kathy. I just looked it up in Amazon. It's $37.99 for the paperback version.
Awesome. Yeah, which, for that price, 38 bucks, it's a great resource. It's very thorough. And, to me, like when I teach a lot of different, these classes for my different clients, that's a book that I actually recommend. So for the end client, it's a cheap solution for the actual courseware. And it's also, very, very thorough, so they cover all the objectives.
And it would be worth spending a few minutes to look at the AFCEA website, because they do offer discounts on the testing. I think it's about 15%, which would more than cover the cost of the book.
Very good point.
Any other questions?
Yes, AJ, this is Mark again. You stated towards the beginning of the actual lecture, you stated that there would be no more than 85 questions, basically, but in some cases there may be more than 85 questions, and we'll have a total of 165 minutes to complete the actual test. If there actually are more than 85 questions, I think you had mentioned like sometimes there could be like 92 questions or whatever. Will it still be 165 minutes, or would there be more time allowed?
So very good question. Yeah, so it'll stay at that 165. And normally what they're doing when that number fluctuates, what CompTIA is doing is they're probably going through what I'm going to call like a beta process. So they'll introduce new questions into the pool just to test to see how people answer them. And those beta questions actually don't count. But us as the test taker, we don't know when they flip the switch from being beta versus an actual counted question. So yeah, you're still going to get the 165 on the time limit, and that fluctuation, it'll be a very small fluctuation. So it's not going to go from like 85 questions to 120 questions. So, it might be, 85 to 88 or 85 to 90. So, but you'll have more than enough time to complete the exam.
Do they have progressive questions?
So Actually, I'll
Like,
let
if
you
you get it-
finish.
Well, say, so it progressive question, like, so if you answer it incorrectly, that it asks a more complicated question to kind of dive into your knowledge deeper. You understand what I'm asking on that?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember what they actually called that. That is, oh man, there was a term. But the short answer to their question is no. So basically, when you do go in and you're taking the exam, your exam pool has already been downloaded. So let's say we're getting 85 questions. Our 85 question pool is already there. So it's already set.
Okay.
Paul, I'm trying to remember what that's actually called. With the question you just asked in technical testing, they have a term for that.
Yeah, I
They'll
know
probably
that there
come to
are
me.
some tests that you can go downhill pretty quickly. If you miss one, they're going to ask more and more to clarify just how much you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this exam is not like that. So that's a very good question.
Very good. Any other questions on the floor?
Yeah, Jose, this exam doesn't require hands-on, is that right? Meaning that in the exam, you complete some activities.
Actually, Jose, could you repeat that? I wasn't, for some reason you're down low. And I
You're
couldn't
coming a little
quite
bit
hear.
low, Jose.
Yes, I'm sorry. Do you complete hands-on activities in the exam?
Yeah, so that will fall under what CompTIA considers a performance-based question. So in my experience, normally what I've seen is anywhere from like 1 to 2 questions where you might be at, let's say, a command prompt, and you're physically typing in the commands, so I consider that like a simulation. So you may see 5 to 6 performance-based questions. 1 or 2 of them could be that simulation format, and then the other ones would be like drag and drops and hotspots, stuff of that nature. So very good question.
Has the test really changed at all since it's got online, or is it just a validation of identity that's really changed?
So you're saying since they went to like online testing, like the actual exam itself, has it changed? Is that what you're asking,
Yes.
Paul?
Well, because this is, I mean, do they hand you a paper test or you're doing it on a computer?
Okay.
It's always been on.
Yeah, so this particular exam, it is going to be computer based, and options that you'll actually have, you can go into an authorized Pearson VUE testing center, take the exam on their computers, or recently, due to like COVID, what CompTIA has done is they've moved where you have the ability to do online testing. So you can actually test from home. And it's still computer-based. It's the same exact exam that you would get at a Pearson VUE center, just the delivery engine is different, but it is computer-based. So very good question.
Yeah, this is Kathy. I had one. I didn't catch the name.
Anybody have any other questions or anything?
Kathy was saying something.
Yeah. The VM tool that you named, I didn't catch what that was.
So I'm trying to talk about the shielded VM when I was mentioning like VM security.
You were talking about like performing the VM activities, and then you named an example tool that they had on the test.
Trying to think back. So
Something that started with an N. That's all I know.
all right, that was Nessus. So what it's a vulnerability assessment tool. Yeah, so Nessus is a tool that we use to basically scan like a machine or a network for known vulnerabilities. Yeah, so it's spelled it's NESSUS. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, I know what it is now, but I didn't catch it when you said it.
Yeah, so now that I think about what I said, so Nessus actually, you can run that in a virtual machine. So typically, security people will run it in Kali Linux. So within Kali Linux, we can set that up as a virtual machine, and then we can have Nessus installed within that virtual machine.
Very good. Any other questions or? And we're right at the top of the hour. So AJ, I certainly appreciate you walking us through this. It's a great deal of information. And I don't know if there's any last notes or any last input.
So I appreciate you having me, Paul. I really enjoyed, running through this with you. And, hopefully I'll have the opportunity to work with some of you guys down the road and maybe, provide the training to you guys as well.
Absolutely. I found it very helpful for me. Like I said earlier, I didn't have a great level of familiarity with it. So this is great.
All right. Awesome. Thank
Hey,
you for
AJ,
having
just one
me.
last question. I'm sorry.
Yep.
You had mentioned the
Sorry,
Nexus.
Somebody's gonna say something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mark was saying something.
That is smart. You had mentioned the Nexus, but you also mentioned something about, I think you said something about, was it Nmap? How does
Yes.
that relate? How does that relate to the Nexus?
So those are two different tools. So Nessus is strictly, it's considered a vulnerability assessment tool. And then Nmap, which is a command line tool, that actually stands for network mapper. And from a command line, there's different switches that we can run. So like, for example, I can run a port scan, so that'll tell me all of the listening ports on a particular device. I have switches to identify the operating system. So Nmap, that is actually a built-in tool that you'll have within Kali Linux. You can actually download Nmap for a Windows-based machine. I pointed it out in the presentation because on the exam, I felt that they went into a lot of detail on Nmap and also what all the different switches do. But they are two separate tools, but they're within that vulnerability assessment realm.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, you are welcome, Mark.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. If you guys have any other input, you can go to the website. We've got places for you to submit suggestions. We have a class coming up next month. The title hasn't been released yet, but it's going to be on Intel and how the government's reacting to some of the China cybersecurity issues. AJ, thank you again for the presentation. Certainly appreciate it. And you guys have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Paul. How you doing? This is Mark.
Mark, I'm fantastic. How are you?
Doing great, sir. Had a quick question for you. I heard you just stated that you guys got the nod for the GIAC, but you pretty much still standing by for the CompTIA.
Yes, sir.
But this training still should be good for our annual continuous learning hours, I would suppose, right?
And Cap or AJ, I think you guys would be able to answer that better than me.
Yeah, just in reference to like, I know as government employees, we're actually mandated right now to complete 20 hours of continuous learning credits, so to speak. Anything dealing with IA, IT type, instructions or whatever. So I'm thinking this would definitely qualify for that.
I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, because it's directly related to, IAT. So I don't think there would be any issues with that.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
And as long as you guys put your name in there. We are making a record of the attendees, so.